Now we have James Riley from Douglas Park School. I'm not sure where Douglas. Does anyone know where Douglas Park School is? It is an awesome school, isn't it?
I recognise
in
you.
Masterton, over the seas, over the water. So James, I chatted to James a couple of months ago about AI, and he was telling me all the things he's doing in his classroom. I thought, let's get him up here, talk about all the things he's doing in his classroom. So,
Done.
James Riley, there we go.
It's a dangerous spot to be given, the last spot at a conference on a Friday where I'm the thing standing between the beer and the wine and the families and you. But I'm really happy to be here. So, ko tararua te maunga, ko waiwakaio te awa, ko whakaoriori ahau, ko Riley, taku ingoa, ko James, taku ingoa. Thank you very much for coming and listening to me. I'm excited to be speaking to you. It's really strange actually being here speaking about AI. I got asked to do it a couple of months ago, and at the time not many people had really heard of ChatGPT. And now it's rarer to find someone who hasn't heard of it. So that's been an interesting challenge as I thought about what to talk about in the weeks sort of leading up to this. To answer the question about why I'm here, I wasn't always a teacher. I'm incredibly interested in technology. My first job out of university, and while I was at university, I was a business analyst. And I worked at IRD. And IRD came in and built us the simulator. And my job was running the simulator where we took 6 months worth of work forecast, and we took 6 months worth of people information, and we smashed it all together, and we created some graphs that sort of modeled the work that was going to happen over the next 6 months. And my job was to make recommendations on this report. And I took that love of technology, and when I retrained as a teacher, I've sort of tried to keep that in class as much as possible. Just maybe out of interest to find out, how many people have actually been in or seen ChatGPT or one of the other chatbots being used? Just hands up if you've seen them being used. Yeah, I was hoping for less hands than that. But that's all right. I'll tell you about my first. I'll give you one demo of it, then I won't demo it sort of much more. I'll just talk about things. My very first interaction with ChatGPT was in late November or December last year. I'd already used OpenAI for a couple of other things, and I saw them open up this thing. I jumped in and had a practice, had a go with it. And I was doing it in the school hall. We were practicing our final song for the celebration time, and it was Hey Jude by the Beatles. I don't like the Beatles, and I hate Hey Jude even more. I'm sort of quite stuck in the 90s. So the very first thing I asked ChatGPT to write me was an essay highly critical of the Beatles. And I typed it in, and I don't know really what I was expecting, but I wasn't expecting it to just start spitting out words. And then when I sort of saw them all appear on the screen and I sort of read them, I was like, this isn't nonsense, this is actually really, really good. So I got really excited, and the next thing I asked it to write me was a parody of the song Hey Jude. It was replaced with Hey Food, about a teacher who got so hungry he ate his students. So it did that. ChatGPT won't write stories about eating students anymore. It's evolved a little bit since it's released. But I spent basically a little while mucking around with it, really, not taking it particularly seriously. But if that's the first time that you've seen a chatbot sort of generate something off such a small prompt, I didn't give you time to read it. You just have to take my word from it that it's highly critical of the Beatles and does quite a good job of it. This is our learning support coordinator from work. Her name's Erina. She got to set her work for the first time 2 weeks ago. And I wasn't part of it, but she was sitting on the couch. There was a non-verbal kid at school. She was looking for ideas about how to work with them, and the person sitting next to her said, hey, why don't you try ChatGPT? And they talked about it, they loaded it up, popped in this prompt, what are some ideas for supporting a non-verbal student? And it gave her a sort of reasonable outcome. 10 things, she looked at them, she was really happy, you can see her face. She was amazed in that same way that I was, and it was just generating it so quickly. And I heard about the story 2 weeks after. The teacher that was sitting with her liked her face so much as she was watching it being generated, she took the photo and flicked it to the principal. I heard about the story 2 weeks later and sat down and said, oh, that's pretty good. What was your prompt? Because I was coming along to speak, I thought maybe I could use it. And I sort of said, what were you going to do with the information? She said, I'm going to go away and write a plan, maybe the teacher aide can pick up and run within the class. So I said, well, you know, ChatGPT could actually do that for you as well. So I said, why don't you try this prompt? Write a 5-week program to support a young non-verbal student socially and emotionally. It should be detailed and explicit with comprehensive teaching notes. And so she was amazed when it did the sort of list of 10 things that you could have got if you'd gone to Google and explored the first 4 results. And she was even more blown away when she saw it create a 5-week plan with information for each day covering everything. Now, I've got no idea about teaching nonverbal students, but she was impressed by what she saw there. She went and did a bit of editing and was able to use it. So I guess my first 2 big takeaways, if I'm going to suggest anything to you and you haven't used it before, the first one is like be really explicit about what you'd like it to do. And the other one is like really dare to dream about what you want. If you want a 5-week plan, don't ask for a brainstorm, ask for the 5-week plan. Sometimes it helps to ask I found it helps to maybe sometimes ask for the brainstorm first and then ask it to use that information. If you use it to generate high quality content and then get it to transform it some way, you sometimes get better outputs. But here's some examples that I've used in class this year. Smash some through pretty quickly. First reading lesson for this group, second day of school, purple group, about 6 kids in the group. One of the boys sat down, opened his book like everyone else did. Everyone else started reading. He refused to even look at the book, but he picked up on words that the other kids were saying, and sort of he was reading along like this and just absolutely refused to engage with the lesson. Now, usually what I would have done is I would have dropped him down a group, and I thought his confidence isn't great. He's had dropped back over the holidays. I'll sit him with an easier group. He can read with them for a while, and then hopefully he'll pick back up and he can go back into the group that he was originally in. Now, I'd given up beating up on the Beatles just with ChatGPT by then, so I thought there's probably a better strategy here. So at the end of the group I said, hey, hang around, what do you like reading about? And he said, I like reading about monsters. And I said, okay, we'll make up a story together, and then we're going to use your story for the reading group for the next 2 weeks. And he said, it can be about a fluffy monster who loses his eye and he goes on an adventure in a cave. So the prompt that I put into ChatGPT was write a story, 7 to 7.5 reading age, and it should be 3 paragraphs long about the details that he gave me. He created it, and then we jumped in one of the AI programs and he made an illustration for it. I printed one off for him, he took it home, and I printed it off enough for the group. Now, that was what I did at the time. What I tend to do now, if I'm using it for creating reading information, is I go a little bit further. So there's the story, there's the prompt, there's the story that it's created. Now things that I do are identify 10 words from a story that a child might have trouble with, and it will give me the 10 words. Suggest decoding strategies for each, and it will give me those. Identify phonics rules that might help, and it will give me the phonics rules. Create 5 comp questions that require literal reading. Create 5 more that require an inference. And then create a lesson plan using the information above, and it will give you the lesson plan. So that's less than a minute's work, and it's generating about 20 minutes work if you were going to sit down and do that. Let alone, that doesn't even include writing a story if you're using a custom story. So the time saving is absolutely phenomenal. Now, I ran into his dad at the gym the week later, and he said he had taken home the story to put it on the fridge, and that he had read it every night, and he was just so stoked with it. And he actually turned up the next day when reading started, holding his little bit of paper saying, we're doing a reading group. And in my head I was saying, no, I'm not doing your reading group today. We just started, I'm doing these other reading groups. And I was like, yeah, we're doing your reading group. So that one little sort of personalisation was able to transform reading for him for the year, and that has continued on. It's been fantastic. Another example in reading, most schools have something like this where they've taken a whole lot of stuff in the curriculum and created a big matrix, and they go through and tick off stuff for the kids. You end up with some really quite awkward ones that are hard to find in journals or the reading material that's available, and they're easier to do with work with the kids with worksheets. So things like prefixes and suffixes, similes and metaphors, knowing the meaning of phrases and expressions, so idioms and figures of speech. They're quite challenging to find in stories and enough quantity to really unpack during a lesson. So I've got prompts like this: write a 5-paragraph story and give a reading age, and then about a kiwi and a tui, which was linked to something else we'd done. Make sure you include a range of suffixes and prefixes, 3 common idioms, 3 similes, 3 metaphors. After the story, list the suffix, prefixes, and list all of them so they're right there ready for me to use for reading. And so what you get is a nice story. It's got all the things that I want the kids to find and unpack and talk about. Some of the other things I've done which are quite similar to this is there'll be a great journal story that I want to use, but I've got a specific learning intention, and that journal story just doesn't include it. Like maybe it's the shun prefix or it's something like that, suffix. And so I'll just say, I'll cut and paste it from one of the online journal sources, and I'll just say rewrite the story and just add in a few of these suffixes or prefixes so that the kids can find it. So I'm still using that really high quality writing that's been published, but I'm just tweaking it a bit so it's got the things that I'd quite like in there. This is a bit of writing that I did. This is something I just stole. Someone else has already written the Supervillains Handbook, but I wanted to do a bit of procedural writing with the kids. So I said to ChatGPT, I said, write me 10 potential chapters. I'm writing a book, Supervillains Handbook, give me 10 potential chapter titles, and it spat those out. The Art of Evil Laughter, how to master the classic supervillain cackle. Like, I find the things that it gives me quite good, which I guess I'm quite surprised about. But then I said, can you please write me the first chapter? It should be a bit of procedural writing with an introduction, a conclusion. Each of the numbered steps should have a topic sentence and details that follow up. And so it spat that out for me. So now I had a model, I had a scaffold for the kids that couldn't think of their own chapter title. I spent a little bit of time, I cut and paste into success criteria rubric and put the success criteria in myself, made that, chucked it all into Google Classroom. So in the space of about 10 minutes, I'd again generated what would have taken me probably an hour and a half to put together to create for people in the past. And then the kids took that information and were able to create their own chapters. So there's one boy who did how to teach pigs to fly. All supervillains need to learn about pigs and their wings, because if they don't have a cloud of flying pigs, what kind of villainy is that? I agree. And they were again able to use AI to generate the pictures for their chapters. These girls wrote the art of the logo, how to create the perfect logo. If you do it wrong, it will affect your social status with other villains. And this is probably the coolest thing that I've done this year. So I shared this prompt with the kids and I told them exactly what I was doing. So I said, this is what I'm going to give to AI and you're going to create the content for it. It was, I'm going to give you 2 characters, make a secret score for each and award a point for a simile, a metaphor, alliteration, describing the appearance, describing the personality. Also award bonus points for characters who are interesting but not usually fight in an arena. I'll give you the first character, then the second. I want you to write a short story about the characters battling. They should not fight to the death, and there should be a clear victor, and the winner of the battle should be the character with the highest score. And then we generated a whole lot of rounds where the kids created characters that then fought in this arena. When we did the fights, I had a slide like that up on the television. It was on Google Slides. The kids were logged on so they could edit the slides as well. And what they did is they looked at the prompt and then placed bets on which character that they thought was going to come out victorious. And so for them, they thought they were playing a game, and what they were really doing was assessing other kids' work or their own work against the success criteria. They were desperately searching for similes and metaphors. They were desperately arguing about which character was described, which one you'd never find in an arena and which you would. And so they thought they were placing bets, and what they were really doing was engaging really deeply with the content and what was expected of them. So we ran this series of fights, and we'd put it in, and it would generate the story. And that's probably my favorite character, which was the vegan teacher who has a pet emotional pig that gets angry, and she's a professional carrot thrower. And this is one of the interesting things that happened when I used the AI that was versing the glue stick, and that's the story there. Even though it said in the instructions there should have been a clear victor, in this case the pig gets accidentally hit by a carrot, and the teacher becomes so upset that the glue stick goes over to support them, and they end up becoming friends, and there's no victor. They agree to call it a draw and lead, which mucked up my round robin system a little bit. We had to introduce a new character. But that night I got this picture. That's the boy that wrote the glue stick character. And because we did a round, we started with about 20 kids, and we knocked them out as they went, and then reran them to find the ultimate victor. They were allowed to go and edit their characters in between. And so he'd gone home to work on the character to try and increase its chances of winning in that next round. And his mum was saying that it was really good. It didn't see him writing on his iPad much when he's at home. Another example from writing, really quick one. This is just differentiation. And if you're wondering about the pictures, most of the pictures are just there to remind me of what to talk about. There's nothing particularly interesting about them. But explain similes in 3 different ways, give an appropriate example for each. In this case, a 6-year-old, a 10-year-old, and a high school student. The 6-year-old example is my day was as exciting as a trip to the zoo, right up to a poem from Robert Burns at the bottom. But just really quickly able to differentiate text or explanations to be able to support the kids. Maths is probably my favourite thing to teach, but it's probably the area that I found the least helpful from working with the chatbots. One thing I have found very helpful is, if you remember, if anyone's worked with the numeracy project before, there's the pink books, and at the beginning of each chapter there's often like tables like this one that are incredibly helpful for making sure you're sort of teaching a range of problems, and the kids are getting the depth of problems and prompts from the teacher. And so I made a couple of prompts that turn those tables into generating questions. So in this case, create 15 metric math problems that the kids could that help the kids practice their 7 times tables, which is what we were doing sort of at the end of last term. Problem types should include equal groups, rate, comparison, part to whole. So everything that table sort of included. And it will spit out that list. You know, some of those questions are quite different, like with the Cartesian products and the part to whole. Much more, you'd use that as a bit of group work, and lots of them are a lot easier and would be fine just to give as independent little work samples. But it took me about the same time as going on to Twinkle and finding something crappy like that to print out and give to the kids. So the time saving of creating something that was actually real quality versus something that you can just pull off the internet are about the same. And then if we go back to that idea before of you know, being really explicit and asking what you want from it, you can take that maths idea and then you can layer things on afterwards. Like you can use the kids from your class names in the problem. That takes no extra time. You can use the context that the kids are interested in the problems, or you can ask it to add in different cultural contexts and language as well, and it will do that. So for example, rerunning that same prompt and adding these things in, you get a question now about Liam studying the nocturnal behaviour of Pekka Pekka, the bat. What can happen though is when you layer lots of things in, it can forget some of the instructions. So sometimes instead of making one massive prompt, it's better to ask it to create, say, that list, and then ask it to go back and edit it to include something else. And it does a better job of preserving everything if you do it like that. Another way we've used it at school, my syndicate this year is reading the Visible Learning Feedback book, and we had created about 5 pages of our sort of notes from the book. And we were sort of looking about what to do next, how are we going to take some of the ideas and start implementing them in the classroom. And the prompt that I used, I put I cut and paste the 5 pages of notes in, and I said, organise this list of ideas by common and coherent themes. And then for each theme identified, summarise it in a paragraph, create a list of success criteria for each theme identified. And what we ended up with after some cutting and pasting and some human editing was the descriptions, the themes, which were the themes that it had identified, the success criteria, which we edited ourselves, and then we've started going through and self-assessing against them. So that was a real interesting mix of us actually taking the information from the book that we thought was relevant for us, and then using the chatbot to speed up that process of finding those themes and creating those success criteria. Across the school, teachers are using it for writing comments. They're using it for planning, they're using it for PD in similar ways that we have, and they're using it for planning their exercise and diets, which is quite common. The principal spoke about it really early in the year. He's very permissive and encourages the use of things like this. And his message was use it but be an editor of it. That was his advice. And I haven't really addressed the limitations of it. I don't have a huge amount of time, and anyone that uses it quite quickly finds out what the limitations really are. But a really good example was one of the teachers was writing a learning comment and asked it to include a Māori whakatauki, which it happily did, put a lovely bit of Māori language in there. When she checked it, it had sort of just completely made it up. And so it can be very confidently completely wrong. And so use it, but be heavily critical of yourself as a user as well. So I guess that almost brings me to the end. I mean, for me, the big differences have been the speed of differentiation, being able to generate content that can suit different kids or suit exactly what I want in the classroom, sort of when I need it. Time is a massive factor for me in my use of it. If you get a group of teachers in a classroom and suggest to them they should be doing something, someone's going to put up their hand and say they don't have time, right? Guaranteed every single time. And that is and it isn't true, right? Like there's always time to do something you really want to do. But the use of the chatbot is sort of different in a sense that I'm doing things that I would never, ever have the time to do. I couldn't have done that arena thing because I would never have had the time to go and write 50 short stories. Just each time who was going to win, doing the evaluation, creating the story. So it allows you to do things that you simply do not have time to do as a teacher. And I guess the other takeaways are, really dare to dream about what you think you can get from it. Don't ask for brainstorms. If you want a weekly plan, ask for the weekly plan. It's probably going to give it to you. The things I haven't covered any of that stuff about how it might change teachers' roles and things like that. Deliberately avoided that. The Khan Academy guy, and there's lots of really interesting videos. What I'd like to say is, I guess, I'm excited about the workload that it could potentially take over from teachers, and excited about what it could transform my job in the classroom into. And I haven't really addressed any of the limitations or problems with using it as well. And my advice would be, if you haven't used it already, you find out what those limitations are reasonably quickly. And if you're using it critically, there's not really any problem. So, yeah, that's me. Thank you so much for inviting me to come. Hopefully that's been...
Any questions at all for James? Anything you'd like to...
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a real challenge, especially for secondary school students, where it's harder to determine whether it's been cut or pasted from the internet or not. A primary school student where I teach 4 to 6, it's really obvious when they cut and paste something. It's not hard to spot. But and I think you're right about the idea that it has to be, if it had been used as a learning tool. The Khan Academy, Mr. Khan, I can't remember his name. He's got a really good example where he set up his daughter using it, and the instruction that he gave it was, we're going to write I think it was a horror story together, and you're going to write 2 sentences, I'm going to write 2 sentences, and then after I've written 6 sentences, you're going to give me some feedback on my writing. So, and then I had a little play, I put in that same prompt, and I just wrote simple sentences, and the advice that it gave me is, hey, look, you could think about varying your sentence types. So I had a little play with that, and I guess the key is how it's going to be used. Yeah. Any other questions? Fantastic.
Hey, look, thank you, James. That was
Pleasure.
fantastic. James. Right.